It's just wonderful to be here in Chautauqua again. And I was here in 2007 for our very first dialogue, and it's absolutely thrilling to be here now as we celebrate the 13th year, and as the dialogues transform themselves from dialogue, continuing dialogue, to dialogue in a round table. There's a proverb, it's attributed to Africa, I don't know. It says, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And one of the things I have learned from seeing the evolution of this dialogue over the past 13 years is that together we are greater than the whole. Each one of us has brought our own expertise. Each one of us has brought our own set of preoccupations and concerns. In our very first dialogue, I remember when it was Ben Ferencz, Henry King, Whitney Harris, who were still alive, all of them. Now we just have Ben, who we cherish. And it was the prosecutors of all the tribunals who were all actively working, trying cases, adjudicating. The ad hocs were in full throttle, and the ICC was just a baby. Drew Biter didn't have his program yet. It was maybe a gleam in his eye, but he didn't even know he was going to have that program. And I certainly didn't know that I would be inspired by him and others for WashU to start their own high school education program. And what I see, because of course in the first dialogues there were very few of us, it was mostly men, and it was mostly older people, and now we are a truly diverse, multi-generational, inclusive, amazing community of individuals who gather on Lake Chautauqua shores once a year. Occasionally we skip a year to come together and have this dialogue and this round table. And I know it's inspired my work. I'm so grateful to the Chautauqua Institution because they create this space of serenity where we can not only come together in intellectual debate, but also explore the beauty of nature, right, and discuss some of the problems with the Amazon burning right now of how can humanity continue to coexist with nature. And we can also have candid and really fruitful conversations about our work and the trials and tribulations maybe we face as a prosecutor of an international institution or as a law professor trying to teach human rights in an increasingly fraught partisan situation in the United States. So I know I'm personally grateful to have been able to come here over time. I'm grateful to the students who got up this morning very early to be here, to some of the prosecutors who traveled 30 hours in confined aluminum cans to get here, and to all of you just for showing up so we can be in community and we can be part of this dialogue. The Harris Institute considers this a signature program. We are located at Washington University in St. Louis, just saying that. We're not in Washington, D.C. or in Seattle. And we are just so proud and so honored to be part of this conversation because maybe we could go faster if we were by ourselves, but together, I really think we can go very, very far. And I really have to give a shout out to David Crane, whose brainchild this was, to Jim and Greg Peterson and Cindy Peterson and Carol and all the people who have shown up, made this possible, and we are just really, really honored to be here and to have it happen again, because it's magic when we come together. So can you just, join me in thanking our organizers? So now I'm going to do the job I was supposed to do, which is talk about our keynote speaker this morning, Navi Pillay, who really needs to, it's kind of a cliche to say she needs no introduction. She really doesn't need any introduction, but I'm going to give you an introduction anyway. It'll be very brief for somebody so accomplished, but I'll just say a few words, especially for some of the students who might not be as familiar with your work. So Navi Pillay is obviously no stranger to international law and justice. In 1995, she was elected by the UN General Assembly to serve as a judge at the newly established International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, where she spent 8 years, the first 4 of which she was the only female judge at the tribunal, and the last 4 as its president. She played a critical role in the landmark Akiezu case, which established rape as a crime of genocide and helped create and form the tribunal's groundbreaking jurisprudence on many issues like freedom of speech and hate propaganda. And following her tenure at the ICTR, she was elected to the first ever panel of judges at the International Criminal Court, where she was assigned to the Appeals Division. Then, as many of you may know, of course, in 2008, she took up the post of UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, a role she served with distinction until 2014, and today serves as the 16th Commissioner of the International Commission Against the Death Penalty. I think it's also significant to know, particularly to the many young people here in the room, that even before she broke into the international scene, Ms. Pillay was breaking down barriers in her home country, even in the face of tremendous adversity. A South African national, she was the first woman to start a law practice in her home province of Natal in 1967, and spent nearly 30 years as a defense lawyer for anti-apartheid activists, exposing torture, helping to establish key rights for prisoners on Robben Island, which I had the pleasure to visit, by the way, earlier this year on a visit, in spite of the fact that as a non-white lawyer under the apartheid regime, she was not even allowed to enter the judges' chambers. Then in 1995, newly elected President Mandela nominated her to be the first non-white woman judge of the High Court of South Africa. So, Navi, we're deeply grateful to you for your many years of service, and we are really looking forward to your remarks today to kick off this 13th annual Humanitarian Law Dialogues. Thank you.
You know, of all the old people in this room, I don't know why they picked on me to deliver the keynote. So I'm thoroughly relieved to see the younger audience here, particularly pleased, even with the presence of high school students. I acted as a judge in the moot court in South Africa. In the Constitutional Court, there were some Constitutional Court judges. I was a retired judge amongst them. And this was a moot court by high school students. And they were debating their own current issues. You know, should they still retain old Afrikaans street names? Should there be regulations prohibiting black hairstyles? That kind of issues, but they had to argue it within the Constitution, and we judges were not there to decide who's right and who's wrong, but how they presented their arguments. And I was truly impressed, and I want to welcome you, especially today, to say this is why discussions like this are so important. It's for the future generations. And of course, I salute all the prosecutors here. Many of them appeared in my court. Unfortunately, the rules, the declaration we take on confidentiality prevents me from telling you all. But I salute them because it's very, very difficult to start an international criminal justice process. And we are very much, as judges, guided by the prosecution. And so many of you are here who were initiators and are responsible for where we are today, good and bad, in international criminal justice, yes. So I was there in Arusha as the president at that time, and we were receiving very bad publicity because the journalists reported we were very slow, the trials were very long, it's costing too much. For so many years, we'd only done a few cases. So along comes a very distinguished visitor. He was not wearing shorts on that day. And he came, he said, to ask me, for some guidance, because he was the first new prosecutor for the Special Court of Sierra Leone. Pretty soon, he took over the interview and told me that he's not going to be making the mistakes of ICTR and ICTY. He said he's just going to have an X number of accused persons, and he's going to finish the whole process within 3 years, he said. So like 15 years later. So you heard David say he tries. So it's a very difficult process. It's a challenge in itself. So today we're looking at challenges, but from a different point of view. It's called the third wave, implementing international criminal law in the face of today's realities. When I retired in 2014, after 2 decades of service as an international judge and the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, I was still swimming on the crest of the first and second waves of justice and accountability. And so naturally, I expected a trajectory of unhindered heights. And I particularly placed great faith in social media and the internet to spread good messages on human rights. Now, at that point, everybody was talking in terms of rights. Including my 5-year-old, one and only grandson. You know, I happened to call him boy, and he turned around and said, "Why are you calling me boy, Grandma? My name is Sendel." So there you are, rights at a very early age, once again giving me the hope that this is just going to, nothing's going to stop us now. Instead, what was once golden age of accountability is now a darker age, to echo what Queen Elizabeth said, Queen Elizabeth of United Kingdom, the Annie Horribilis, which is what we're going through now, or as some believers say, and I sat next to a highly religious individual on the plane next to me for about 20 hours, and he said he's coming here to speak to an audience of 40,000 Americans, so it seems they need this, the spirituality. So anyway, believers like him say that we are experiencing the cycle of Kali Yuga, the age of darkness and ignorance, and the bad news is that apparently we can do nothing about this predicted cycle except sit it out, and the good news is seemingly that this dark period is about to end. See, so negative, but we're heading for the positive. But as all of us in this room are neither believers nor mystics, we will readily agree that disasters are man-made and solutions must come from us and not the stars. You know, I have a double meaning about man-made. That rule about the tides, you can see, always addressed to men. I welcome so many women here. I think we outnumber them finally. So what we have is the growth of decades-long institutions that have contributed to the golden age of accountability and justice, largely through the efforts of civil society, of lawyers, of students, and academics, just activists all over the world, and people who cared. These people also worked within government, within ministries, very, very good people who pushed the agenda for justice there. So as you know, for the first time in history, in 1945 at Nuremberg, judicial power, backed by punishment, was exercised by the international community for the very first time to achieve justice and accountability. Well, for the very first time in modern times, because there'll always be somebody in the audience who will remind me what happened in 1400 and something. So in modern times, Nuremberg was the first effort to achieve justice and accountability of individuals in the commission of war crimes and what were then called crimes against humanity. The resort to justice as integral to the peace process in the aftermath of great conflicts is a new development that still needs nurturing and direction. So let me repeat that where we come today as integrating justice in the peace process, because so many of you also addressed the question of need for reform in the UN and the way the veto is being used, particularly by 3 of the veto-holding states who are not members of the International Criminal Court. And there they have the power to decide who gets referred to the court and who doesn't, obviously not themselves. So it's very important to follow this thought that justice is integral to the peace process. Maybe I should interrupt a bit to say to you that when I became High Commissioner for Human Rights, I said to the Secretary General that I would like to address the Security Council. You know, that's what newcomers do. We come in there, we know nothing, and we make these demands. And he said to me, well, you can't go to the Security Council unless they invite you. And he said he can take me and have me sit behind him, which he did for Louise Arbour, the High Commissioner for Human Rights who preceded me. And she was asked to leave the Security Council because that is not a place for human rights. And who asked her? The democratically elected government of South Africa, represented by the ambassador there, who then subsequently called me to say, you have a very good opportunity to address the Security Council members at their retreat. And that's how it started. And I ended up addressing the Security Council 15 or 16 times, pushing just this agenda that how can you deliver on international peace and justice if you're not concerned about human rights violations on the ground? Because every violation alerts you to conflicts looming. The conflict in Syria started when there was a non-violent protest for civil and political rights. And instead of a dialogue, the government shot at them. This is how it started. The conflict in Tunisia started over economic rights. A graduate couldn't find a job and he set himself alight. So there's always a human rights cost. Sudan now, I'm coming to the former president of Sudan later, but the civil protest there started over a protest over the price of bread. Now, unfortunately, my successor Zaid was stopped from addressing the Security Council. So we really need much more work done to getting ourselves back where we were in raising concerns of justice and accountability before the Security Council. So to return to my speech, the subject of accountability then for serious violations of international law, including genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, was initially embraced in the collective security architecture set out in the Charter of the United Nations, subsequently elaborated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Bill of Rights. Preservation of the right to life and protections against systematic and gross violations of human rights and human dignity were henceforth to remain cornerstones of the international normative system built after the defeat of Nazi ideology and fascism. More significantly, all states were expected to integrate these norms into their domestic legal frameworks and take measures to hold accountable those individuals found to have been in violations. So all states undertook that obligation, including the United States. So I hope when Pompeo's commission, that's redoing human rights, I understand, for global impact, remembers where it all started. But Nuremberg lay dormant for the next 50 years until 93 and 94, when the United Nations Security Council took the courageous step of establishing these ad hoc tribunals for former Yugoslavia and for Rwanda. And these have been followed by other ad hoc tribunals, international courts in Timor-Leste, Sierra Leone, Cambodia, Kosovo, the courts for Iraq and Lebanon, and finally the world's first permanent international criminal court, which was established in 1998 by the adoption of the Rome Statute. New ad hoc tribunals are coming up in Central African Republic and South Sudan in the aftermath of conflicts there. So, I did hold a unique position in being one of the first judges on the Rwanda Tribunal and one of the first judges on the International Criminal Court. So I must say, for the 5.5 years that I was on that court, I had great difficulty entering the United States through immigration officers who said, and which are you a judge? They would say, because I didn't fit the profile in appearance of a judge, you see. Which court? And I said, the International Criminal Court. Oh, is that the court that wants to try our soldiers? Well, you know, that tells you that propaganda on social media, these cliches are what are picked up by people all over the world. That's all they connect that International Criminal Court to. Whenever I've addressed students in South Africa and Africa, they would shout right back at me, don't talk to us about human rights, go and talk to the United States. They don't separate the administration from people. So once again, it's what is the news that filters down to us eventually. So as I said, in addition to these new judicial mechanisms to achieve justice and accountability, we have strong and sustained civil society pressure, which led to the development of a robust international institution for the promotion and protection of human rights and for monitoring and reporting violations of human rights by state and non-state actors. In 1993, there was the Vienna Declaration, where it was civil society that demanded that states set up a Human Rights Commission to monitor implementation of human rights obligations. Once again, it's not that governments woke up one day and decided they want to be seen to be more accountable, more just. It was a push of civil societies that we have such a mechanism. Now, there are many mechanisms for human rights monitoring. Do look that up. It's called the Universal Periodic Review of the Human Rights Council. It reviews the human rights record of every state, and of course, atrocity crimes always comes in there. Every state, including the United States, is reviewed, and recommendations are made to that state by the other reviewing states. There are 58 independent experts who also visit countries and make recommendations to states on better human rights protection. So what's clear is we do have the fundamental frameworks for safeguarding against violations and crimes. They are in place. These include a strong and growing body of international law and standards, a vigilant civil society engagement, as well as institutions to interpret the laws, monitor compliance, and apply them to new and emerging human rights challenges. And these are so solid. In my view, they will be able to resist any new challenges coming from people who are ignorant or defiant of the international progress we have made. So today, together, these international tribunals and courts have rendered justice in many situations, holding key perpetrators to account for war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. The case of Akiyesu in the ICTR was mentioned. So this is what the tribunals did. They created groundbreaking jurisprudence where there was none before. So actually the first case we sat on was of the case of John Kambanda, the interim prime minister of Rwanda. And all the others we tried were political, military, and religious leaders. An opportunity that Rwanda itself would never have had because countries were not prepared to hand these high-level leaders for trial inside Rwanda. There was no certainty that they will receive a fair trial, and also Rwanda had the death penalty and used it quite liberally up to that point. So therefore, that's another service to the people of Rwanda, that there was international accountability, and same with former Yugoslavia. The Special Court for Sierra Leone determined that the abduction and sexual enslavement of women in that conflict constituted a crime against humanity of forced marriage. And the same court also convicted Charles Taylor, former president of Liberia, another country, for planning and aiding and abetting the commission of crimes against humanity in neighboring Sierra Leone. And this is an historic conviction of a former head of state for serious crimes committed while in office. So much of credit goes to people like David Crane, Brenda Hollis there, who saw to this. We were hoping for this kind of result, but it happened. So he's been sentenced to 50 years now. Let me pause here to say Charles Taylor was convicted on the basis of decisions that came from the ICTR and ICJ on aiding and abetting. But you don't have to be physically present there to aid and abet. Looking at the facts, you can do it from remotely. However, the ICTY, unfortunately, under one appeals chamber, turned that law upside down. I mention it here to tell you about the pitfalls and the challenges we face, and why we have to sometimes look at individual judges coming from various jurisdictions who are unfamiliar with following precedent and looking up to the appeal chamber's decisions as final. So he changed the law, and that then had secured the acquittal of a well-known was here. Yes. Yes, you see. See why we need the practitioners here. And then a subsequent appeals chamber of that same tribunal reversed that decision. The uncertainty of where some interpretations of international law also remain, that's another challenge. This is why we need ongoing attention to all this. I should also mention, since I come from South Africa and Africa, that the relationship between the International Criminal Court and the African Union is marked by controversy. At its extraordinary session, the General Assembly of the African Union in October 2013 expressed concern over, I quote them, the political use of indictments against African leaders by the ICC, that prosecutions against heads of state could undermine sovereignty, stability, and peace, and they resolved that serving heads of state and high senior state officials be covered by immunity from prosecution. You know, the notion that political power can be a safe haven for impunity would create a dangerous double standard for accountability. It is also incompatible with international law and the Rome Statute, under which national immunities are not a bar to the court exercising jurisdiction for ICC crimes. Most of the Middle Eastern countries have not joined the International Criminal Court or support international criminal justice process because of that. They believe in the immunity of the political leader. That's difficult to change. The Indian Prime Minister told me the day the United States signs up to the Rome Statute, we will. So there's something so sinister there, you know, how fast they're now going to follow the more recent examples from here. South Africa, which is a democracy, now has an international crimes bill before Parliament, which provides immunity from prosecution for ICC crimes for the head of state and senior state officials. And this is something that Richard Goldstone and I are challenging together with other colleagues to stop them from going so far back from the original position they adopted. So while the jurisprudence of the ad hoc tribunals and the International Criminal Court show that significant advances have been made in promoting accountability and delivering justice for victims of serious violations of international law, there is no doubt that the fight against immunity is far from achieved, fight against impunity. The challenge comes from failure to cooperate with the ICC by states and international institutions and the absence of political will to act against impunity. Regrettably, the international community remains unable to react consistently, strongly, and speedily to crises, including situations of grave human rights violations with high potential for regional overspill. Over half a century since protection of individual human rights and prohibitions against atrocity crimes acquired the status of binding international norms, some of which are jus cogens in nature, the world still continues to witness horrendous human suffering and widespread and systematic violence against civilians from rebel and terrorist groups, as well as at the hands of state actors and authorities themselves. In a world struggling with international challenges, today's realities compound the challenges. The United States, led by a president who has no respect for the rule of law and for human rights, no longer exercises a leadership role. I truly appreciated the leadership role the United States played in the Human Rights Council when I was High Commissioner for Human Rights. Well, except when it came to themselves and their friends. So this vacuum has created opportunities for state actors to flex their geopolitical muscle, stepping forward and rolling back accountability gains of the past 25 years. What was once a golden age of justice and accountability is now a darker age of the strong man. At no time has modern international criminal law come under more scrutiny than today. You know, I had fresh discussions with people inside the UN and particularly human rights leaders there, and it's truly sad how so many governments are following the leadership of the United States in resisting human rights. So at a very high level, great concern inside the UN as well. I would say steeped in ignorance, steeped in fear of justice and accountability, many reactionary political leaders are taking the lead from President Trump to attack international criminal justice, labeling the International Criminal Court as a den of inequity. Duterte, the president of Philippines, who has used his military to carry out extrajudicial executions of alleged drug dealers, numbering 25,000 and still counting, has pulled out of the ICC. So as president of the International Commission Against the Death Penalty, I have ensured that we cover extrajudicial executions as well. So as the new leader of Burundi, who assumed power after widespread violence against the opposition. So these are the recent withdrawals from the International Criminal Court. We should be concerned with Trump's warmongering threats against Iran, against Venezuela, Yemen, and North Korea. His America First and isolationist rhetoric has spawned copycat vigilantism and acts of terrorism in the United States and elsewhere. John Bolton has threatened to arrest any ICC personnel who plan to conduct investigations on US territory and has withdrawn entry visas to the prosecutor and her representatives. Trump is undermining the rule of law and international humanitarian law by his anti-human rights, anti-UN, anti-NATO, and anti-ICC actions. His trade war with China and Mexico and withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement and his withdrawal of US support for a two-state solution for peace in the Middle East, his encouragement of unlawful Israeli settlement expansion into Palestinian land and moving the US embassy to Jerusalem are acutely retrogressive measures. I've been to Palestine, I've been to Cuba, and I can't tell you how much they dread their future arising from actions such as these. Trump's language is racist, sexist, support for misogyny and white supremacy in his race to make America great again are serious threats to the magnificent edifice of human rights institutions and respect for the rule of law built by the international community over the years. His rhetoric has been trumpeted by reactionary forces in Europe, where one opposition leader said Europe is for whites only and everyone else should be kicked out. Now, in reaction, the United Nations' highest body of independent human rights experts collectively expressed their alarm over today's realities, and I thought I'd quote them because they sum up the challenges under this third wave. Today, they said, a chill wind is blowing through much of the world, and the very notion of human rights is under increasing attack. So-called populist movements are invoking nationalism and traditionalism to justify racist, xenophobic, sexist, homophobic, and other forms of blatant discrimination, taking advantage also of the difficulties of the current economic climate. Hate speech, aiming to incite violence, hostility, and discrimination, is dramatically on the rise, as is violence against women, children, ethnic, religious, or belief groups, persons with disabilities, sexual minorities, migrant, and many other groups. Inequality is growing dramatically, and democratic institutions are being systematically undermined. Now, recall that these independent experts have been to various countries all over the world, and they're speaking of the factual situation they have found. They say more and more governments are turning increasingly to intrusive technologies which systematically embed and exploit means of mass surveillance which threaten a whole range of fundamental human rights in many parts of the world, where these assaults on human rights are being reinforced by attacks on the human rights movement. The space for civil society, without which there can be no enduring and meaningful respect for rights, has been effectively closed down by many governments. International treaties such as the International Court Statute are being denounced. Funding for human rights bodies is shrinking. Attacks on the integrity of monitoring mechanisms are increasing, and any form of international solidarity is rejected as a threat to national interests. These experts called upon governments to recognize that a world which repudiates fundamental human rights values, retreats from established standards, and undermines international human rights institutions is a world which will be less secure, more vulnerable to devastating conflicts, and utterly incapable of protecting the rights of vast numbers of people who do not happen to look or think like those in power. So in carrying out its Chapter 7 mandate of ensuring international peace and security, the play of geopolitical agendas in the UN Security Council in response to wars and conflicts has had catastrophic consequences, with hundreds of thousands killed, millions displaced, and swelling the swarms of refugee flows, large swathes of countries and cities destroyed. Many see the acts of double standards and the pursuit of geopolitical agendas as detrimental to building trust in international justice institutions and as an impediment to the struggle against impunity. And as I said, many in Africa are suspicious of the selective targeting of countries in Africa for ICC investigations. They question why the UN Security Council referred African states only, Darfur and Libya, to the ICC, but not the attack on Iraq or the conflicts in Syria, Sri Lanka, and occupied territory of Palestine. The failure of some states to place the collective interest above short-term geopolitical considerations and narrow definitions of national interests have led to persistent failures to take actions in situations where, for example, action was necessary to ensure accountability for gross violations of international humanitarian law. So I would say a broader conception of national interest to guide the work of the UN Security Council is necessary, given its charter mandate as the guardian of international peace and security. because the collective interest of states is also in the national interest. You know, I did have an opportunity to tell the P5, the veto-holding states, at a breakfast. They hosted me to a breakfast. So it's interesting, their point of view, that the veto is not the obstacle. Russia said, well, they didn't use their veto in respect of Libya, and where is Libya today? And others told me they do not have mechanisms for implementation. They just pass resolutions. They don't operate an army. They went to South Sudan to themselves. The Security Council went down there, spoke to these two leaders, but they wouldn't listen. So that's something we also have to address, how to help the Security Council do its job better. Now, I have stated that the lack of political will is the greatest impediment to the advance of international criminal justice, but the reality is that many see the system of international criminal justice, and the ICC in particular, as the problem. So let me list some of the complaints. I hope I'm within time. Who's daring to stop me? I can continue?
A couple minutes.
A couple of minutes. So the complaints then is the inconsistency in jurisprudence, and which I already mentioned. Apart from two completed trials, that of Lubanga Diallo and Bosco Ntaganda, former rebel commanders in the Democratic Republic of Congo, both of which cases are now under appeal, the ICC has a dismal record of successful prosecutions. It is also criticized for excessive delays and curious outcomes. Here's some of them. The Kenyan indictment against the President Uhuru Kenyatta was withdrawn by the prosecutor for lack of evidence after many years of investigation. The reversal of the guilty verdict of former Congolese Vice President Jean-Pierre Bemba by the Appeals Chamber in a divided opinion. There's always those divided opinions amongst judges. Some judges are very proud of their dissent. They feel they will go down in history if they write their dissent separately. So this is just giving you some of the inside stories. The public is frustrated by divided opinions. You know, spell out the law with clarity. Give us your reasons with clarity. The rejection by the pretrial chamber of the prosecutor's application to open an investigation over ICC crimes allegedly committed in Afghanistan by the Taliban, as well as Afghan security forces and US soldiers and CIA officials, giving as their reasons the limited prospects for a successful investigation and prosecution, is troubling. The reasoning of the chamber has come up for criticism by some who suspect pressure from the US in the light of the John Bolton threat against court officials. The acquittal of Laurent Gbagbo, the former president of Cote d'Ivoire, at the end of the prosecution evidence, also in a split judgment. But here too, there was almost a five-year investigation before this happened. And there are many articles about political interference in this case. The prosecution has been conducting investigations for lengthy periods with little or no results, such as the 2008 conflict between Russia and Georgia, the 2014 conflict in Gaza and Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories, the conflict in Colombia, and dockets relating to the attack against Iraq and violations of Rohingya refugees. The prosecution's investigation in Afghanistan actually extended over 10 years before being summarily dismissed by the court. So these are some of the challenges. Lack of cooperation from states over execution of warrants of arrest and poor political support for investigations is also very clear. While victims of atrocity crimes endure some disillusionment with the progress of international criminal justice, their persistent calls for justice and accountability has reaped unimaginable impact on the ground. And I refer here to 3 situations that we never thought would happen. Omar al-Bashir, former president of Sudan, is now on trial in his country on charges of corruption and the killing of peaceful protesters. He's been under ICC indictment for a very long time. Jacob Zuma, former president of my country, is now on trial for corruption and receiving bribes in arms trade with the French state company Thales. So that's going to be a very interesting trial. And Najib Razak, former prime minister of Malaysia, has been charged on 42 counts of corruption and money laundering. So the conveners of this dialogue, in response to the challenges confronting our world, have devised a more assertive role for us at this conference to use a new roundtable format, creating a roadmap of fresh ideas and initiatives for the implementation of international criminal law. The roundtable is expected to come up with a realistic product that would be useful to practitioners, diplomats, politicians, and others in considering new ways of achieving justice for victims of atrocity crimes. This they call the third wave, and it's all about delivering justice for victims. So I welcome these breakout sessions, and I respectfully now charge the chair of the roundtable, Brenda J. Hollis, to create a working document that addresses the challenges of adapting modern international criminal law to the challenges of our times, some of which I have briefly hihighlighted. Thank you, Brenda.